let's start bringing tablets in. Let's start producing tablets. Let's not list them on the shelf. Let's not make claims on the labels, but make them in, the other advertising that we use, whether it's online or through a podcast or whatever it may be. And let's just kind of see how far we can push this. And I think it's gotten to a point where the TGA is like, okay, you guys have pushed us far enough. Now we're going to expand our net so that it's not open to interpretation. If you are a capsule, a pill, or a tablet, you are under our regulatory structure and have to be listed on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods.
Welcome to PricePlow.
All right, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the PricePlow podcast. Today we've got Joseph Mencel from the Massive Joes in Australia. Although today he's in Italy traveling, but he took some time out of his day to talk a little bit about some important legislation that's been proposed in Australia. We're from America, but we like to help everyone out. We saw the writing on the wall of this legislation, and so first thing I did was reach out to Joe. It was a little bit ballsy, but he responded, and we're excited to have him on the show. So, Joe, if you could do a little bit for us, just kind of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the Massive Joes quickly, so we can just kind of give some background on, where you're from, what you do, and how you're in this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys first and foremost for having me on the podcast. I appreciate it. And when you say reaching out, I think you tagged me in one of your posts, and I saw the tag, and I was like, let's do it. Let's put a podcast together and let's have a chat about these amendments to the legislation here in Australia with regards to how sports supplements are going to be regulated in the future. So a little bit of background to me for those of you who don't know who I am or haven't heard of Massive Joes, or perhaps have heard of Massive Joes but don't really know what we're about. So we do a few things in the supplement realm. MassiveJoes.com is the website that I run. It's one of the biggest supplement retail websites in the country, arguably the biggest information database when it comes to supplementation, training, dieting, everything you need to know about the health and fitness lifestyle. We specific content. So we're really, from a website perspective, a kind of one-stop shop for anybody who's interested in health and fitness with a particular slant on supplements. We also run retail stores. So we run 10 retail stores around the country here in Australia. And then we do some other bits and pieces with distribution. We import a lot of different supplement brands exclusively into Australia. So we deal with the logistics of importing, the logistics of distribution, run an apparel company as well, but that's probably a little bit of a side project to what I'm here talking to you guys about today. So started the company, just a little bit of background to my experience, started the company in 2005. So coming up to 15 years in the industry. I started quite young. I started when I was 19 myself. So I've been doing this, professionally pretty much as long as I've been, a professional in this industry. So a whole bunch of experience, and have kind of been able to ride the wave of supplements, first kind of getting legs in the industry here in Australia, which was the early 2000s, right up to now where, it's a big part of health and fitness here in Australia at this point in time.
Awesome. Yeah, I think one of the things that I was always really interested in with you guys is that you're not just a retailer, you're not just someone who talks about product, but you know the regulation because you do the importing. So you understand a lot of how this fits into the government and how it's regulated. And myself coming from a background with NutriBio, that's very important to me, is understanding the legality and why we're allowed to utilize these things. So once I heard about this this new amendments coming out, I figured you're probably one of the best people to speak to in Australia about this. So I want to preface this by saying Mike and I are not necessarily against any kind of regulation, but when we saw this, it seemed like it was a little bit over the top. Mm-hmm. So maybe we could kick this off with talk a little about what is actually happening. I've read through most of the paperwork, the actual legislation, and they have like a handbook for it. It seemed like there were differing topics on it. It's either protein is absolutely fine and okay, but also if you make the claims that it is muscle building, recovery, or if you make any sort of therapeutic claims, it becomes a drug now, or a therapeutic good is what they're calling it. Yeah. So it seems to be there's, I don't want to call it misinformation, but there's, it's like an oxymoron in a lot of cases. Some products that are possibly fine to be dietary supplements could also qualify as a therapeutic good, correct?
Yeah, so I think there's been a little bit of, let's say, for lack of a better term, a little bit of misinformation with regards to, I think, the way the legislature's written and what it is trying to achieve through the way it's written as well. So there is, a couple of different PR campaigns happening in Australia at the moment that are kind of saying, supplements are going to be wiped out. The industry, all of the products that we currently are freely able to sell are going to be banned, and you won't be able to sell them. Consumers won't be able to access them. The only way they're going to be able to get them is to import them from overseas. There's a lot of misinformation flying around. I think if you kind of strip it back and you read the legislative amendments, the way that they've been written, in conjunction with the consultation paper, because you've got to remember that these two things are supposed to be read together. Certain ways, sometimes legislation is written a certain way, and what it is designed to achieve, or what effect it's designed to achieve, can be quite different to the way it's written. But the first step during a legislative amendment is to write draft legislation, cast the net kind of as wide as it can possibly be cast, and then it kind of gets broken back to achieve what it's designed to achieve. So I think when you strip it back and you read the draft legislation, the way that it's kind of written in conjunction with the consultation paper, really what the TGA, in my personal opinion, is trying to achieve here is putting a regulatory structure in place where certain supplements that have been able to kind of float in this grey area in Australia now have a little bit of regulatory backbone to them. And I think in order to kind of understand that, as kind of the supplement industry kind of operates in the US is slightly different from Australia. So in Australia, we have FSA-ANZ, which is Food Standards Australia New Zealand, which is designed to regulate foods. So, I don't really need to define foods, things that you eat, generally speaking. That's FSA-ANZ. Then when we go to medicines, therapeutic goods, drugs, so on and so forth, the TGA was set up in the late 80s to regulate those sorts of things. We call them therapeutic goods. But when these different structures were set up, supplements didn't really exist. You might have had protein powder or meal replacements or, maybe very basic supplements, but supplements as we know them now, coming into 2020, really didn't exist. And they really sat in this gray area between, partly food, partly therapeutics, but we're able to kind of carve out, I guess, this gray niche between the two regulatory bodies. And we don't really have any sort of regulatory body that is the regulatory body that sets the regulatory framework for supplements. So a lot of supplements now sit somewhere between the two, and the government really doesn't have a way of regulating them. So the way that this draft legislation is set up in conjunction when effectively going, okay, we think that the TGA is probably the best equipped with the way that the regulatory structure works for therapeutics to be the governing body that governs supplements and sets up this regulatory framework that effectively takes this gray area and puts it in the TGA net, or allows the TGA to kind of cast its net to include this gray area so that now supplements fall under the therapeutics. That, I think, is what it's designed to achieve.
Interesting. Okay. So one of the things, and I think you also mentioned when we were messaging a little bit that there's been a few events recently where maybe kids have been hurt or something. And I kind of understand it may be seen as a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, but at a certain point, because we've seen this in America, kids overdose on powdered caffeine, right? At a certain point, it's like, all right, you know what? We can't trust any of you to make your own decisions, right? At a certain point, it's like, all right, for a little bit, we're going to have to choose. We're going to have to approve. We're going to have to manufacture for you something. One of the things that I noticed is that there was some wordage about TGA manufacturing products. Does TGA own manufacturing facilities in Australia that they will manufacture for you?
Yeah, no. So the TGA will approve manufacturing facilities. So you can have a manufacturing facility, and then it's kind of like what you guys have in the States. You have the GMP, the Good Manufacturing Practice. So the TGA has a kind of similar structure that if you want to produce goods that are listed on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, they need to be made in a TGA approved facility.
Okay, so and so pretty much anyone can become approved by the TGA if they are meeting the right standards for them, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So it's not like a government controlled manufacturing facility or facilities or anything like that. Like private manufacturing facilities that meet the guidelines of being TGA approved can apply for TGA approval and then make goods that go on the register of therapeutic goods here in Australia.
So it seems like pretty much in most cases here, it's legitimizing the industry. It's making sure that there's no adulteration of products and make sure that things are meeting label claim. Could you see any possible drawbacks from this? Did I lose you there?
We
I lost you for a second.
Sorry.
There.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's it's positive across the board. Is there actually any case where there might be a negative because of this is happening?
You know, I guess if you kind of read into the PR campaigns that are against what the TGA is trying to achieve, they will go down the path of it's restricting consumer choice and kind of use the fear of, you know, consumers won't be able to access supplements in Australia anymore. They're not going to be able to, you know, exercise their free choice to put what they want in their bodies, so on and so forth. I just don't think that's the case. I think that, you know, if you really read the legislature and you look through, you know, you guys have obviously read it, there's the two different columns. And it's like, okay, if there is a product that meets any one of these requirements in column A and then also meets these requirements in column B, then it's going to be captured by this legislature. And when you read what they're actually looking for, they're looking at, you know, ingredients that are already scheduled with the TGA. Authority banned goods, ingredients that the TGA have specified, or they're already banned. Like we can't have, you know, one of the ingredients they've identified is DMBA, DMAA, dendrobium. These are things that we can't have in supplements anyway in Australia, and they're just kind of, I guess, reinforcing that through this draft legislation. And then it's, you know, when you include those ingredients, or you're a capsule, a pill or a tablet, and you're making what the TGA considers to be therapeutic claims, then you're going to fall under the net of this legislation, and you have to be produced in a TGA compliant facility and listed on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods. So, you know, is it going to restrict consumer choice? Look, as it currently stands at the moment, if you're an Australian and you go to the US, you're able to access a lot of supplements that we can't have in Australia because of the current regulatory structure. So it's probably going to be perhaps an enhancement on that, but it's not going to be so significant that it's going to completely restrict consumer choice. In my personal opinion, I just don't think it.
Yeah, so it seems pretty reasonable. When you look at, I mean, I can see when I read, especially the two columns, the decision-making flow chart. There seems to be some areas where I think a lot of people are considering the fact that it might be abused in some way. I guess it comes down to, once you become a therapeutic good, does it cost more to manufacture? Does it cost to be approved? Are there going to be unfair costs put on these companies because they're in this category now? Is there a possibility that some of these companies are not going to be able to afford that? Because, for instance, in America, once the product becomes a drug, you have to pay for all the drug trials, you have to pay for all the studies and everything. And that can cost millions of dollars to have a drug approved. So that's what a lot of people are afraid with in America with supplements, is that a lot of these supplement companies could not afford all the lawyers, the studies, the claims, all these things to be done. Is it possible that in Australia some of these smaller companies are going to have a problem because of this?
Yeah, it's possible, but on the flip side, you already have a lot of supplement companies, mainly vitamin companies in Australia, that already produce products that are listed on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods. I mean, you know, if we kind of, I'm going to step a little bit off what's written in the legislation now and just talk about my personal experience in the industry. It's kind of been a little bit of an unwritten rule in the Australian supplement game up until this point in time, that if you were attacked and you weren't on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, you couldn't be sold in Australia. That was kind of, you know, even though the legislation doesn't read that way, that was kind of the understanding. It's like if you want to sell supplements,
we missed the most important part of that sentence. You said "if you," and then it blanked out. Can you repeat that?
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Yeah. So the kind of unwritten rule in the supplement industry in Australia up until this point in time was that if you were, a capsulated product, a pill form product, a tablet form product, and you weren't listed on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, you really couldn't be sold in Australia. And even though the legislature, it's open to interpretation as it's currently written, but it was kind of understood that, okay, if you're going to make a capsule or a pill or a tablet, you have to have what we call an AUSTL number, which means you're you're listed on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods. You're made in a TGA compliant facility, and then you can go and sell your capsule form, your pill form, or your tablet form product. And there are a lot of companies in Australia that already do that. So if you want to go and buy a vitamin C tablet, it's going to be on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods. If you want to go and buy a CoQ10 tablet or a fish oil tablet, or anything that's pill form, capsule form, tablet form, a lot of these companies are already listed on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods. So they've done it. And it's not that these products are super expensive because the costs associated with doing so, inflate the price so much. These companies do it. They've been doing it for a long time, and they've been able to carve themselves a nice little business doing that. So I think to make that argument, I think that there's already evidence in the Australian marketplace that, there's going to be, extra costs associated with being in a TGA approved facility and being listed on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, but it's not going to be so detrimental that it's like you out of the business or make it too expensive to business or So back to the unwritten rule that ever since I've been in the industry since 2005, it's kind of been known that you don't play with or pills or tablets unless you are listed on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods. Probably over the last, I would say 5 years, there's been a lot of companies, they're like, let's see how far we can push this. So let's start bringing tablets in. Let's start producing tablets. Let's not list them on the Austell. Let's not make claims on the labels, but make them in the other advertising that we use, whether it's online or through a podcast or whatever it may be, and let's just kind of see how far we can push this. And I think it's gotten to a point where the TGA is like, okay, you guys have pushed us far enough. Now we're going to expand our net so that it's not open to interpretation. If you are a capsule, a pill, or a tablet, you are under our regulatory structure and have to be listed on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods.
I think it sounds pretty reasonable. I think a lot of people have a bit of I also see a knee-jerk reaction where it's like, they're coming in to ruin our industry. But once you read it, once you speak, you discuss it for a little bit, it sounds like it's pretty reasonable. It sounds like it's going to be the better for everyone. We have a lot of the same issues in America right now where DMAA is banned currently. Like as per all of the judges' rulings, it is not able to be used in products. And yet I get a formula sent to me every single day that has 100 to 200 milligrams of DMAA. People are just pushing the boundaries because they want to see what they can get away with. And it's a quick buck, of course, but I wouldn't mind if something like this happened in America on a light scale. I think it sounds like it makes sense and it might be for the best. So
that brings up enforcement, though. I mean, I think the reason is a lot of these companies are making calculated decisions that they could probably make money for a good year or more selling this stuff and then the FDA's enforcement is so slow late that they might be able to get away with it completely, or they might at least be able to profit beyond the point of whatever the FDA punishes them with, if they ever punish them. So like in terms of Australia, how does the enforcement work? Because as we've seen in America, we have these laws that are just typically not very strongly enforced unless you're doing something extremely egregious.
Yeah. So there has, it's one of those situations where the way that the enforcement is kind of written is if the TGA wants to come down on you like a ton of bricks, they can come down on you like a ton of bricks. They often don't. There has been a few cases in the past, if you go back and look at, at least my personal experience in the last 15 years, where there have been big companies involved in importation and distribution of what they call unregistered therapeutic goods. So capsules, pills, or tablets that aren't registered or aren't listed on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods. And they've received, multi-million-dollar fines once the TGA has enough evidence, and if the TGA chooses to pursue them, chooses to prosecute them. I think the problem with it is there's so many companies doing it. If the TGA was going to go and prosecute all of these companies, it comes down to really resources. Like, how many resources are they actually gonna dedicate to going and prosecuting company number 1, company number 2, company number 3, up to, there's probably hundreds in Australia that are just really kind of pushing the limits at the moment. So for an approach of going, well, we're going to approach this differently. We're going to cast our net as wide as we possibly can, and then the enforcement becomes a lot more efficient as well. So I guess that that could be one of their motivations for these changes.
It sounds like it makes sense. I know that in the past, Australia it's very, very strict on the more not gray area stuff like pro-hormones, SARMs, steroids. They come down very, very hard. That's one problem that we're having in America right now is SARMs as a whole. And part of the problem, and I think that this is actually a good step for you guys, because what we see here is that if you're a company that's manufacturing DMAA, SARMs, pro-hormones, stuff like that, you're not using a quality manufacturer, and you can't trust what's in the product. And for the purpose of this discussion, we can say there are some safe SARMs in theory, but you have no clue that you're getting these products if you're getting it through a unregistered manufacturer or manufacturer that's running a weekend shift. And so in this case, where you have TGA registered and audited facilities, you know that it's meeting label claim, you know that it's safe, you know that there's no other harmful goods in there. It sounds like it's going to be the best for everyone. After December 3rd, when this is put into place, is there going to be, because you mentioned how you cast the net very wide and then it comes in, is there going to be a process of this law getting culled down a little bit?
100%. Definitely. So December 3rd is the cutoff date for public consultation. So the way that the TGA, and this is the way that they schedule substances, which means they put different ingredients on a banned list or a prescription only list, or however they want to schedule them. There's always a 6-week public consultation period. So the TGA will put out what they want to do. It might be like they've done at the moment, which is a draft legislative amendment, or it might be a draft to schedule, for example, DMAA, or the most recent one in recent memory was phenibut. They scheduled phenibut and made it a prescription only ingredient. So there's this 6-week consultation period where the TGA says, this is what we want to do. We're going to let the public know, and we're going to allow the public the 6-week period to submit their, thoughts, queries, concerns, whatever it may be. So that 6-week period started and finishes on the 3rd of December. So the 3rd of December is the end of that public consultation period. Then the TGA will read over all of the submissions from the public, and then they'll take the next step to go, okay, well, maybe we've gone too far with the legislation. Maybe we need to trim it back. Maybe we need to go a little bit further, whatever decisions they need to make. And then there's, that it's quite a long drawn out process when you're trying to amend legislation. So this is not just a single ingredient, like we want to make phenibut prescription only. We want to make DMAA a banned ingredient effectively by putting it on Schedule 9, which is what they did a few years ago. This is a complete change to what the TGA is responsible for regulating. So it would be multiple years. I would say 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 years until we actually see any of this come to fruition and actually make it into law.
Awesome. I like it a lot. I think you shine a lot of light on good information on this and misinformation where it's been spread. Out of curiosity, what's the legal status of CBD in Australia?
State you live in at this point in time. So CBD, I believe, is legal in the ACT, the Australian Capital Territory, and there may be another couple of states that it's legal in, but generally it's prescription only. So you need to have a prescription to get it, which is Schedule 4 on the poison schedule, which the TGA is responsible for regulating.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, that's one of our hot topics here right now. So all this stuff kind of really ties in together. How can we regulate it? How can we make sure it's safe? How can we make sure that the stuff that's in on the label is in the product? And I think that as a whole, the industry is getting better worldwide.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that's also happening right now is that China is banning the manufacturing of SARMs and probably a lot of other stuff, and that was caused, I think, it all started by fentanyl and the opioid crisis. So China is obviously where a lot of these chemicals are coming from. It almost seems like a lot of these organizations, a lot of these pieces are moving at the same time, and there probably is some sort of coordination between some of these authorities, because you see things in China, Australia, and America all happening at once. And on the CBD note, Ben told me, and I haven't confirmed this, but that there was 18 warning letters over CBD this morning in America. So we should have said the date is November 26th of 2019 right now. So it seems like there might be some coordination between these nations, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because if China is not going to comply, then it makes life way harder for everyone.
Yeah. And I think, I tend to keep my finger on the pulse of what's happening with the FDA and supplements in the US with you guys, because we're involved in importing so many different products. So, the companies that I work with in the US are telling me about the warning letters and what's been put on the FDA watch list and what the FDA looks like they're going to ban and so on and so forth. And I think it's a similar sort of situation that you guys have in the US, and it wouldn't surprise me in a lot of other countries as well, where, supplements really do fall into this gray area of no one's really responsible for regulating them because they're not drugs, so that they don't fall in the US, directly under the FDA, or in Australia directly under the TGA. They're not always food, so they don't fall under that regulatory structure. So they're kind of somewhere in the middle, and we don't really have a governing body that is 100% responsible for the regulation and ensure that ingredients that are on the label are actually in the product, that the source of ingredients is, what they're supposed to be and above board. There is no governing body that is directly responsible for this. So a lot of the similar issues happen in a lot of similar countries.
Yeah, I think one of the big things right now is this pushback from these people who want these, possibly dangerous ingredients at certain levels. And I don't know exactly how the regulation was set in Australia, but one of the things that I always talk about is that in America, we have TGA, which defines the dietary supplements, defines where they come from, exactly what they can be and what is one. And that was actually voted on by the public. Like, that's not like something that our state representatives or the government put together. Like, we voted on that ourselves, so we have to live with it, I'm not sure exactly how it's defined in Australia, but I'm sure it's pretty similar. It comes from something that's in the diet. We can't have things that are also drugs also be a dietary supplement. And that's where a lot of these things get a little bit confusing between. So it sounds like everything's improving. And I'm happy we did this, because some of my confusion with the way that I was reading and interpreting it sometimes came a little bit with some of those PR campaigns down there. It's really make it sound pretty scary. So will you be involved with the communication process with the TGA? Have you submitted anything, if you don't mind us asking?
Yeah, I have through not through a PR channel or a PR campaign, but directly through. The TGA provides the way it's done. There's an online submission form. You hop on their website, you go through your online submission form, you make your submission. That's the way that the consultation period works. They have absolutely zero interest in dealing with PR campaigns or listening to what PR campaigns have to say for and against. That is the way that they want submissions made. That is how they're going to consider submissions. So that's the way that I've made my submissions and my thought on what I think about the situation personally. And that's how I kind of been.
Awesome. Well, it's awesome to see someone who's willing to put that out there and submit. I think sometimes in America, I don't know how the TGA is viewed in Australia, but the FDA is seen as someone with an agenda, a little bit intimidating to most companies. But I like the fact that there's open communication in Australia. It sounds like you guys are going to come to a pretty fruitful decision.
Yeah, well, I think it's a necessary step in the right direction. It kind of, from a personal standpoint, it kind of frustrates me a little bit that there is so much misinformation floating around, because I think the agendas of certain PR campaigns are slightly misdirected. I think that if those people who are listening who are, interested and perhaps concerned about the lack of consumer choice or in favor of enhanced regulation, actually go to the TGA website, read the draft legislation, read the consultation report, come to your own opinion, and then make a submission through the online submission form. That's the process. That's how it's supposed to be followed. Is bound to read those submissions, and they do read every single submission and take them into consideration when they're making their final decisions. So far as the TGA having a hidden agenda, I mean, you just look at the size of the pharmaceutical industry in Australia compared to the size of the supplement industry. It's probably 1/25th to 1/30th of the size. I just don't think that the TGA is going to dedicate the sort of resources that they need to dedicate to such a small piece of the puzzle to give efficacy to any kind of hidden agenda that they may have, in my personal opinion.
Awesome. Well, Mike, do you have anything else to add or ask for this?
No, in general, it sounds like you are not as concerned as some of the other things we've seen. At the same time, I guess it's a good thing that some people, you need someone to push the other side of the pendulum a little bit so that we have a little bit of awareness and to keep the authorities semi in check. You can't just let things, you can't be silent. So even if an overreaction is still, I think, a good thing sometimes, because in the clickbait culture we live in, you kind of need someone to wake you up and make you read the legislation. And now we're here talking about this because of some of those knee-jerk reactions. So in general, it sounds like you're not as concerned, but it's a good thing, I think, that some people made us concerned, because here we are talking. So that is what it is. I don't know.
That's a good point.
And
awesome.
Just to that as well. Don't take my calmness, I guess, as a lack of concern. I am concerned about what will happen if the TGA kind of does everything that they want to do, which is why I do encourage people to go and make these online submissions and voice their particular concerns. I'm a fan of some sort of regulatory structure for supplements. I'm an advocate for it, but I think it's the only way forward for the industry. The industry is continuing to grow. It's nowhere near the size of the pharmaceutical industry in Australia. It's nowhere even close to the size of the food industry in Australia, but it is kind of carving out its nice little niche in between the two. I want nothing more, as both a supplement consumer and a businessman in the supplement part of the industry, to see the supplement part of the industry continue to grow, help improve people's fitness, help improve people's health. And I think we're kind of at a crossroads where we are unable to do that with the current lack of regulatory structure. I think it's a necessary step in the right direction to allow the supplement part of the industry to continue to grow, have a positive impact on people's lives. So holistically, that's where I'm coming from, but I still am concerned that perhaps the TGA has overstepped their boundaries with the way that the draft legislation is currently written. I think there needs to be some sort of regulatory system in place. There needs to be some sort of regulation, but I think that if their goal is to use the same sort of regulatory that they use for therapeutic goods, pharmaceuticals, drugs, so on and so forth, for supplements, that's not good.
Okay, so probably maybe one last question for you then is, we have a lot of viewers. We speak to consumers a lot, but also a lot of companies also watch our content because we're kind of I wouldn't call us watchdogs of the industry, but we kind of, we see everything and we report on everything. Is there a message you have for people who export their goods to Australia over the next 3 to 5 years? Is there anything that they need to be doing to make sure that they're in line with this? Is there anything they can do to prepare? Obviously, we can't submit since we're not citizens of Australia, but if we're manufacturing in America and we're doing business, maybe not with TMJ, but with some distributor down there, is there anything that we should be doing to prepare?
From the perspective of an American company or an American supplement consumer?
Yeah. For an American company that does business with Australia, is there anything that they should be concerned about?
I don't think there's really anything that you can do until we get a little bit of a better picture as to how this regulatory structure is going to look, and what is actually going to pass through Parliament and become part of Australian law. I think it would be quite foolish to go and put steps in place and act right now as if the legislation is going to go through as it's written, which would make a lot of supplements therapeutic goods, because I just don't think that that's going to be the case. I think from an American business's perspective, an American manufacturer, just to keep your finger on the pulse, see how it progresses over the next few months, over the next few years, because like I said, it's going to take multiple years for actually anything to come to fruition, and just try and keep your finger on the pulse and keep your ear to the ground and see how it progresses.
Awesome. Well, it seems like for now, the best thing that we can do is watch, listen, and communicate. Mike, I'm pretty good. I think we covered everything here.
Yeah, I've learned a lot here, so that was very, very helpful and useful, and we really appreciate your time, Joe. We, love everything you do, man. For years and years, I can't jump on YouTube without seeing your videos pop up and everything, so it's they're always good, and keep the content coming. Thanks for informing us. Thanks for informing your public, and I might still try to make a comment for one suggestion to your government regarding what I think, and it's something I've always said is, like, I would love to force the bottle to state where exactly something was manufactured, because I think at the end of the day it's the contract manufacturers who are like the easiest to enforce one bottleneck kind of area where we can get a lot more compliance, and then we don't have to play whack-a-mole with brands. I really think the places, and so I think one thing it would be great is to have everyone have to disclose where this product was bottled, capped, manufactured, and I would love some government authority to force that to be printed on the bottle, because then I know exactly where something's made. That's the only thing I wish that we would have over here that I think would help clean things up a little bit, because if you see some shady stuff, you know where it's at, and if it's not on the bottle, it's illegal. So that, anyway, it's a little bit off-topic conversation, but I'm going to see if I can maybe nudge the government to say, hey, here's what I wish we had in America. Maybe you guys could think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that idea. That's good.
But no, thank you for your time, Ben. Yeah, that's all I have. No, we really appreciate what you're doing over there at Master Joe's. We will be sharing this and, of course, tagging you on everything, so you'll see that and get it up as soon as possible, because I know the commenting period is running short here, so got about a week or so. We do
under a week now. Under a week. No, thank you guys. I appreciate being on the podcast, and I hope I've been able to add some valuable insight and information to the listeners and the viewers of your content.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe. We really appreciate your time.
Welcome to PricePlow.